Hey everyone, it's Dale, and we're going to talk about data storytelling today. And this is the lecture. It's probably going to be in two parts or two videos that we missed because of the Thanksgiving holiday. And so when we think about data or we talk about data, we oftentimes think this is something new, but in reality, it really isn't new. We've been collecting data for generations. Here's an example of a census from 1920. If you look at every single cell in there, that's data, right? It's names, it's dates, it's gender, it's height, it's education, it's all those things are data. They're data points. So we've had data for a long time. Just now we have easier ways to actually consume data, understand data, and then produce works of data. So if this is something that interests you, probably a good thing because a lot of jobs now will require some sort of data skills, whether it's social media analytics or data journalism or understanding advertising campaigns, things along those lines. It's very important along the way. And it's important to realize the need for this is only going to continue to rise as we start to collect more and more and more data from people. So when we stop and think about the things or the platforms that collect our data, I mean, we could run through the gamut, right? We could talk about so many different things that collect our data. And here are just a few. Just stop and think for a second. I know we've talked all semester about the types of information that Facebook has about us, but everything from name to phone number to birthday to your friends and family to relationship statuses to the things you like to the things you don't like, to the brands you like to the brands you don't like. Again, Facebook has all of this information about us and uses it as its business model, to be quite frank. But we give this information voluntarily to Facebook as part of the experience of using the platform. Every single tweet you send could likewise be a data set. So Twitter has all kinds of information on us too, name, name, URL, bio information, what types of accounts you follow, things like that. But then the individual tweets themselves could also be considered data. You can download your entire archive of Twitter and have a huge data set of things that you've tweeted over the time. Instagram has all kinds of data on us. It's more of a visual platform, but some things that you may not think about with Instagram, we can tell, do you prefer to post square photos or vertical photos or horizontal photos? Instagram would know that based off of your posting history. Instagram would also know what types of content do you actually like. Do you prefer photos to video? Do you prefer square photos to vertical photos? So all those things. Which filters do you use? Things like that. Instagram would have all kinds of data on that. Stop and think about what your phone has about you, whether it's an iPhone or an Android, doesn't really matter. Our phone contains just about everything about us, from medical information to all of our contacts, to all of our texts, to all of our emails. You name it, what apps we use, how often we use those apps, what time of day we use these things. Our phone really does know everything about us. Likewise, your browser has a ton of information about you. So what searches you're making, what sites you're visiting, how often do you spend on those sites, how quickly do you leave those sites. Your credit card information is oftentimes stored in browsers. Some of y'all may store your passwords in browsers as well. So a lot of information there. Your mail account has a ton of data about you. So in particular, Gmail, for those of you who have ever wondered how this happens. So, Google makes its money off of advertising, and you've probably gotten one of those ads after you send your friend an email asking about something very specific. And then guess what? Next time you open up Gmail, you've got an ad waiting for you based on whatever that conversation was. That's because Gmail knows what you're talking about and can then use that information to produce specialized ads just for you. Traffic apps like Waze. So not only do they know where you're going and how you're getting there, but they know how fast you're driving. They know, again, what routes you take. They know what types of hazards are out on the road. Are there debris on the road? Is there roadkill? Is there construction? Is there a police officer up ahead? Waze now also is communicating with Spotify, so it would know what type of music you're listening to when you're going to certain places. All of that's data. Netflix, again, what you watch, what you like, what you don't like, what your friends are watching, all of those things. Netflix has a ton of data about you. For those of you who drive a newer car, your in-dash navigation system has a lot of information about you. It's got your seat settings, it's got your temperature settings, it's got your miles per gallon, it's got the speed that you typically drive, it's got the routes you take, all of those things in your car. Likewise, we have smart thermometer or thermostats now that can learn our settings. So if you wake up every morning and have a Nest thermostat in your house, you wake up and you turn the air conditioner on, or you turn it down a couple of degrees, and then when you leave for work, you turn it back up, and then when you get home from work, you turn it back down. It only takes a couple of days before the Nest thermostat and other smart thermostats can now learn your preferences, and will do it automatically based off of a history of how you've done that. That's all data that it's using in order to do that. And we haven't even really started thinking about the whole Internet of Things, which is where the Internet's going to be a part of everything that we use. The biggest example we have now, other than things like the thermostat, is we have a lot of smart refrigerators and smart TVs out on the market. There are refrigerators out there that will send you text messages saying, hey, you need milk tonight, or it will scan your refrigerator, know what you do have, what you don't have. It may produce a recipe based on the things that are in your refrigerator. So this is where we're heading with these types of things. All of that is data. So here's an example of how some brands or companies might be using data that you wouldn't expect. And sometimes the companies don't even quite know necessarily what they're getting into when it comes to that. So a couple of years ago, Target created worldwide headlines because a father got upset that Target was sending his teenage daughter ads about pregnancy, so for cribs and things like that. The father went into a Target store and got really upset with the manager. And the thing that happens with that is that Target had all kinds of data based on what that girl was buying. So you can see down here in that bottom paragraph some of the things that she may have been buying regarding supplements like calcium, magnesium, and zinc. She bought a lot of cotton balls, scent-free lotions, scent-free soaps, things along those lines. Target uses all that data and compares them and can tell that if people normally are buying these things, chances are they're pregnant. So the dad went in and complained that Target had sent these ads to his house addressed to his daughter. The manager was very apologetic and said he didn't know what happened. Called back a couple of weeks later, and the dad actually had to apologize to the manager, saying, actually, y'all were right, she is pregnant, and I didn't quite know it. So sometimes data can be predictive, not always, but a lot of times data can tell trends and patterns based on how it's being used. And then, of course, there are all kinds of other things that would fall under data, and you could, this list could go on forever if you stop and think just about the pure number of data that we have out there right now. So when we talk about data, it does give us different ways to tell a story. So I'm going to show you 4 different maps here, or 4 of the exact same maps, but just with different data sets on top of them. So if you look here, this is population density. This is based off of the 2010 census information. And if you look at the map, the darker the red are the more populated areas, right? So this is a pretty good map that shows where the big city centers are, right? You've got, Miami along the East Coast. You've, of course, got New York and Boston on the East Coast as well. You've got Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, Colorado. One thing that when you think about these types of data sets is who would want this type of information? So a couple of very common uses for this, cell phone companies would probably want this information, right? Because they're going to need to know where do they need more towers. Advertising agencies might want this information to know where can they focus their ads in order to reach the largest markets, right? So, and again, we could go on and on and on for reasons why people might want this type of data. So you can see that. Now, same exact map, a little bit clearer picture here. This is actually education. So the darker the red, the higher the percentage of bachelor's degrees or higher. So if you look over here in Colorado, I'm trying to move my mouse, but it's not showing up. So Colorado, you can see has a very high concentration right around Denver, which would make sense. Denver has a reputation of being one of the most educated cities in the country. But also remember that this data set is dependent on population, right? If there are very few citizens there, and a couple of them have master's degrees or bachelor's degrees even, that can sway the data. So just remember, you have to know the full context of the data as well when it does that. If you see over here in Washington, D.C., an incredibly high rate of degrees there, and that would make sense. Washington, D.C., also one of the highest educated cities in the country. Here's another map, but this is looking at foreign-born population as a percentage. So the darker the blue, the more foreign-born population they have there. So Texas, Florida, New York, California, no surprise. The one thing that does usually stand out on this is Nevada. So I oftentimes, if we were in class right now, I would stop and ask you, why would Nevada have such a high foreign-born population? And very quickly, the answer always comes into Las Vegas. So people move to Las Vegas because they know they can find a job there, whether it's working at a casino or at a restaurant or at a hotel or a taxi driver or Uber driver, whatever it is, there are a lot of jobs there. And so people move there when they are looking for jobs. Usually when they're moving to this country, it's a good place to go to know you'll probably be able to find work there. And then here's one last U.S. map. This actually has two data sets on top of it. So let's start first with the colors. So the darker the red are the less restrictive gun laws. The more white, so you can see California, New York, totally white there, are more restrictive gun laws. So that's the first data set. You could just do a map of the country determining where they have the highest gun restrictions and the lowest gun restrictions. And then the numbers on top of those are the numbers of deaths per 100,000 people. So it's a percentage of deaths, or a representation of how many gun deaths they have in that country. So if you look down at Alaska, Alaska has very few gun laws, but it has a really high number of deaths per 100,000 people. So again, if we were in person, we would stop and talk about why. There are usually a couple of main reasons why. One is there's a lot of hunting accidents. So that would be one. Alaska also has an incredibly high suicide rate. So it would make sense, or unfortunately it would make sense, that Alaska's number would be really high. One thing I want to use this map for is that it's always, again, I just want to reiterate that context is really important. It's important to keep in mind that you can find just about any number you want to back up whatever case it is you're trying to make. So since this is a map about gun control, we could look at states like, let's say, let's take either side of the gun control argument. So if you're pro gun control, you would look at New York, which has very restrictive gun laws and has very, very few gun deaths, right? You would say, look, this is proof right there that gun laws work. But if you go to Illinois, where it has very restrictive gun laws, you have quite a few gun deaths. So people who are against gun control could point to Illinois, and they often do, and say, well, look, Illinois has a lot of gun laws, and people die there just as much as they do in states, or even more so, where there are less restrictive gun laws. So just keep that in mind, that this can always be interpreted for any type of argument you're trying to make. But data journalism like this oftentimes gives you a clearer picture of what the story is actually like. So let's take a couple of looks, or look at a couple of examples of great data journalism. And I always like to start with the Texas Tribune and its Government Salary Explorer. So this is a database that the Texas Tribune updates every once in a while regarding every state employee. So all people who work for the government here in the state of Texas will be listed eventually in this government salary database. So I have the list here of the 4 highest paid employees in the state, and we would normally go through and try to figure these out. And I will tell you the first one is no longer the highest paid because he just got fired last week. But the football coach at Texas A&M University, or the former football coach at Texas A&M, was the highest paid employee in the state of Texas, and I will tell you that whoever A&M hires to take his place will probably automatically become the new highest paid state employee. The head coach at Texas UT basketball is second. The head coach of UT's football team is third. And then the chancellor of the UT system comes in fourth there. So you could continue to go on and on and on to look at not just the rankings, but you could also go to each of these entities. You could go to job titles and compare those, or you could search by name. So if you go search me, I'm in there, and you'll just see a big sad face there where it has my salary, right? Here's another example of great data journalism. This is looking at the pay gap between men and women who do the same job, and how women oftentimes make much less than their male counterparts. So you can see here that the Wall Street Journal looked into 446 of the major U.S. occupations, and in 439 of them, they found that there was a gender pay gap. So let's just look here at childcare, right? You can see it's down here toward the bottom left of your screen. As you continue to go along the screen, you're seeing a rise in salaries as well, but also higher pay gaps usually. So men oftentimes make, or females make about 79% of their male counterparts here. Those of you who work in public relations, you can see we're now moving down this chart or line story here with data points and data sets. Female PR executives make about 77% of their male counterparts. And then you could go all the way to the last one, which is the highest pay gap and also the highest amount of money. Physicians and surgeons, female physicians and surgeons earn 64% of their male counterparts. So again, this is a really important story. It helps shine a light on some of the inequalities that are happening in the workplace, but it also tells that story in a way for you to be able to explore the data on your own, rather than somebody just writing or shooting a video to tell you this type of story. Here's another example of great data journalism. This is from 538, which is Nate Silver's data journalism venture. He works for ESPN now, but used to be at the New York Times. And this is taking a look at all 33,599 gun deaths, I believe, in 2016. And you can see up here at the top, you can go through causes, genders, ages, and races. So we could actually break down the data based on, was it a murder? Was it an accident? Was it a suicide? Things like that. Or you could do men versus women, age groups, or ethnicities when it comes to that. So let's just go through and look at one set of data. We're looking at murders between males 15 to 34, and then we'll take a look at the different races here and see what kind of knowledge we can gain from this data set. So you can see here we're looking at Asian males 15 to 34. There were 76 gun deaths. So you can see the black part of the box there is shaded out for the number that is represented by this. You change that to white, and now it's up to 913 of those 33,000 and change gun deaths. You can see the box has grown there. When you go to Hispanics, it was 1,166. So again, the box is getting bigger. And then when you go to African Americans, it was 4,312, taking up a fairly large chunk of all homicides in terms of the data. So again, you could now look at this and say, okay, what is my story from this? And different people might have different stories or different interpretations that comes out of this data. But being able to understand the data and comprehend the data in a very easy way is so key in order to provide information to people and also help spur interest or maybe cause you to want to go and read more about some of these things. I know if I was still a journalist, I would have questions after looking at data like this. And my biggest question would be about this group right here. And I would have two main questions. First one is why? And then the second thing is what can be done to prevent this from happening, right? So those would be questions I would want to explore as a journalist based off of this data set right here. And then we have things that are much less serious. This is just a little distribution of English letters, so A through Z, and where they fall in words. So you can see here, if you look at Z, Z is very oftentimes toward the back end of a word. Y is almost always the last letter. X is almost always the second letter, right? So you could continue to go through these and look and see the frequency of where those letters are falling in different types of words. So just a few examples of great data journalism. Coming up in the next video, we're going to talk about the steps to data journalism or to data storytelling and how to make that happen.